Greeting and salutations. I am Lloyd, a producer at LCD Productions, and I have come to share this new series of visual audiobooks with you, the listener, the supporter, the viewer. Together we will go on a journey like never before, fly to new heights with Project Aerospace, explore new land and cityscapes with photations, even change the dimension of time through the power of time-lapse photography from live to tape. We'll even travel beyond the mind's eye into worlds captured and generated through animation from Thumbs United daily animation series. As we together go on these journeys filled with photography and theater of the mind, I hope you remember the core belief that we hold, that anyone can become the master of art, meaning that it is not some born skill what makes someone good at being creative. It is the desire to practice and spend time being creative that creates the master. I hope that these films, photography, and stories inspire you to set some time aside and practice some creativity. I believe if we all spend more time creating and being constructive, the world would be a better place, a more friendlier and fulfilling place. Thank you for coming. Let's begin this journey. Thank you for experiencing this journey we have created here at LCD Productions. For more information on how to support these films and projects, visit photations.com/support. Fine art photography prints from journeys around the world can be purchased from photationsstore.com, and digital downloads of our photography and visual audiobooks is available for personal use. Commercial use is available at a different rate. Thank you for your time. I hope to see you here again.
Good day. This is Live Today. We are continuing our story, our visual audiobook of the Airship Golden Hind. Chapter 12, Confidences. In one of the storerooms, the content of which had been removed in order to adapt the place to present requirements, sat Enrico Jarvis and the would-be assassin. They were under lock and key and had been unceremoniously bundled into a Durance vial without the formality of an introduction. Enrico was feeling fairly content, in spite of being a prisoner. After all, he reflected, nothing had been proved against him. He had soared in his encounter with the captain, and owner of the British airship, and, all things considered, he was being well treated. He made no remark when his new companion was gently put but firmly propelled through the doorway. The newcomer was equally reticent, and the ill-assorted pair, one triggered out in the nondescript garments of a low-class inhabitant of Gibraltar, and the other in European clothes and a tarbush, sat opposite corners of the limited space. For the best part of an hour neither spoke. Occasionally they regarded each other fervently. Then the gentleman who had demonstrated so effectively how not to shoot straight began to slumber, sitting on his haunches, with his arms clasped round his bent knees. He knotted his crimson tarbush until his head found a rather uncomfortable resting place on his collapsed hands. Then, in a solemn condition, he began muttering his wandering sentences, punctuated with many aches. Enrique listened intently. Hitherto he had been in ignorance of the motive that had prompted the would-be murderer. Now he had enough evidence to form the conclusion that they both have a motive in common, to wreck the attempt of the British competitor to win the Chavez prize. Nevertheless, Jarvis was a cautious disposition, and when his companion awoke, he still maintained his attitude of aloofness. Breakfast time came. One of the Golden Hind's crews appeared with a quite substantial meal, and both men were hungry. The pure cold air, a striking contrast to the hot, enervating atmosphere of Alexandria, had given them an enormous appetite, and the fact that they had to share their meals, were not provided with knives, forks, did not trouble them. "Pass the salt," said Enrico's companion, speaking in German. Jarvis complied without hesitation. The request was so natural that it took him completely off his guard. "So you speak German," remarked the wearer of the tepish. Enrico shook his head. "Come, come," continued the other. "Do not say that you cannot. I asked you for the salt. I was not looking at it, so that you have no excuse." Jarvis swallowed a big chunk of bread and stole cautiously at the door. For a few seconds he listened, lest there should be anyone eavesdropping without. "Yes," he admitted, "my mother was German, but don't speak so loudly." "From what town came she?" inquired his companion. "From Lubrick," he replied, "and I come from Amsterdam. I am Swabian, and my name is Otto Fressing," announced the German. What are you doing here?" "I am not here of my own free will," said Jarvis guardedly. He was rather inclined to shut up like an oyster, but his semi-compatriot was persistent. "I suppose these Englishmen will hang me," remarked Otto. "My one regret is that I did not succeed in my attempt." "What attempt?" asked Enrico innocently. As a matter of fact, he knew, having watched the shooting affray. Otto told him. "The trouble is," he added, "I've been paid for this business 10,000 Egyptian pastries. I have a banker's order for that amount in my pocket. Will they search me?" "Without a doubt," replied Enrico, whose knowledge of British criminal courts was of a first-hand order. "But in a way you are lucky. You were paid. I was not. I succeeded. You failed." The German raised his eyebrow, but forbore to elicit further information concerning Jarvis' motives. "My difficulty," resumed Otto, is what I am to do with this banker's order. I undertook the business because I was hard up, and should be hanged or even imprisoned with my family will not benefit because the money will be confiscated." He paused. Enrico eyed him thoroughly. He would willingly rob anybody. Now was the chance to enrich himself at the expense of his semi-compatriot. He paused. Enrico eyed him thoughtfully. "The English cannot keep me in captivity much longer," he observed. "They can prove nothing against me. When I regain my liberty, I propose paying a visit to my mother's relations in Lubbock. Perhaps I might be able to render you a service by handing that draft to your relatives." Otto showed no great eagerness to close with the offer. His hesitation increased his companion's cupidity. "Rest assured there was money will eventually reach a safe destination," he urged, enigmatically. "Better even to run the risk of it being lost than to let it fall into the hands of the Englishmen." "That is so," agreed Otto. "At any rate, I can entrust it in your keeping for the next few days, until I know what the purpose doing with me. You will, of course, be paid well with your trouble." Enrico waved his hands depreciatively, swearing by his patron saint Enrico of Guadalajara that it would be a present pleasure and a duty to assist a German in distress. "Very well, then," agreed Otto, producing a paper from the doubled crown of his tarbosh. The rock score, carefully concealing his delight at the success of his plan, took the document and glanced at the amount written thereon. As he did so, he uttered an exclamation. "Dios!" he ejaculated. "What is it?" inquired Otto. "The signature. Hans von Everich. I know the man. He was at Barcelona when the U-boats were busy. I helped him to—" He broke off abruptly, realizing perhaps that there were limits to an exchange of confidences. "Von Everich? I have never met him," declared Otto. "All I know is that he is now an agent for Count Karl von Sinzing." "Where is he now?" inquired Jarvis. "Who? Von Sinzing or von Everich?" "Von Everich. He is usually to be found in Corinth," replied Otto. "Why do you ask?" "Because he might also pay me what von Sinzing owes me," replied Enrico. "We apparently are engaged on similar tasks." "To cripple or delay the airship?" asked Otto. "Up to the present, we have not been able to make much success of it. My prospects were not at all bright, but one of my hopes My prospects are not at all bright, but one may hope that when we arrive in Singapore, von Blinker will be there. A clever fellow, von Blinker. I met him at von Evering's house just before I left Corinth for Alexandria a month ago. What is he going to do? Asked Enrico. I believe he'll... Shh, someone's coming. Chapter 13. The Tale of a Cyclone. Hanged if I like the look of things one little bit, declared Forsythe frankly, glass dropping as quickly as if the bottom of it had fallen out, and on top of it all we get this. This was a wireless from Point de Gala, announcing that a terrific cyclone was raging west of the Maldives island, its path being right-hand circle. That meant that unless the Golden Hind made a radical alteration of the course, she would encounter the full force of the wind. It was the fourth day of the race. The Golden Hind had passed over Skorica at daybreak and was on her way across the Arabian Sea, next scheduled landing place being Colombo. If we carry on, we'll hit that tail of the cyclone, said Keaton, consulting the chart of the Indian Ocean. Yes, but what is worse, we'd pass through the dangerous storm center, and then, more than likely, get a nose ended on the other side. If we were lucky enough to weather the sentry, replied Forsythe. It's too jolly risk, Keaton. At 15,000 feet, it may be as bad or as worse at 500 feet up. Call up Metroid and ask what petrol there is in the tanks. Kenneth went to the voice tube and made the necessary inquiry of the engineer. By Jove, we'll risk it, declared Forsythe when he reached the desired information. We'll go south a bit, then make straight up for Mental. Kenyon was on his way back with the audacity of the proposal. The distance between Croatia and the Western Australia was a good 5,000 miles, or 36 hours of uninterrupted flight. At 140 miles an hour, there was sufficient fuel on board for 40 hours, which meant a reserve of 4 hours only in case of anything occurring to protract the run. Oh, we'll do it, said Forsythe, confident, as he noticed the companion's look of blank amazement. Better run the risk of cutting things fine than to barge into a cyclone. Southeast by south is the course. Remarkable thing we haven't heard of anything of friend Zing Zing, clocking in, observed Kenyon. Wonder where he's making for. We'll hear in due course, replied the baronet. He crossed the cabin to consult the miraculous chart of the world on which were pinned British, American, and Japanese flags recording the latest known position of the rival airmen. There was a German flag ready to be stuck in, but nearly 5 days had elapsed since von Zingzing left Spain, and the crew of the Golden Hind were still in ignorance of his whereabouts. But they had the satisfaction of knowing that they more than held their own with the others. The Americans had passed the Azores with Count Hashi's Benzi, which had made the stupendous non-stop flight to Honolulu, had developed engine defects that promised to detain him indefinitely. 2,000 miles in 9 hours, remarked Forsythe, referring to the Japanese airplane's performance. Some shifting that, but Count Hayashi has evidently gone to the pace a bit too thick. He's our most dangerous rival, Kenyon. Unless von Zingzing has something up his sleeve, sir, added Kenneth. Trust him for that, said the baronet grimly. However, time will prove. Well, carry on, Kenyon. Call me if there's any great change in the weather. Within the next 2 hours, there were indications that even the new course taken by the Golden Hind would not allow her to escape the cyclone. Right ahead, hitherto, cloudless sky was heavy with dark, ragged thunderclouds that, extending north and south as far as the eye could see, threatened to close upon the airship like the horns of a Zulu impi. Roused from his sleep, Forsythe lost no time in making his way to the navigation room. Although he was not to be on duty for another hour and a half, Peter Branstein had also hurried to the chart room. We're in for it, declared Kenneth. We are, agreed Forsythe gravely. Evidently there is a second disturbance, but judging from apparatus, it's none the less formidable. No use turning tail. We'll go up another 5,000 feet and see what it looks like. The Golden Hind rose rapidly under the joint action of her six planes. In addition, the boridium of the ballots but even then it was touch and go whether the gathering storm would encircle her. As it was, she flew within the influence of the fringe of the cyclone. Shrieking winds assailed her, seeming to come from two opposite quarters. Her huge bulk lurched and staggered as she climbed. Her fuselage seesawed as the ballast struck the enormous envelope above, while the jar upon the tension wires was painfully felt by the crew. For a full 10 minutes it was as black as night. They gave the dark masses of clouds were riven by vivid flashes of lightning, blinded by the most incandescent glare. Forsyth and his companion could do little or nothing but hang on, trusting that the Golden Hind would steer herself through the opaque masses of vapor. It was impossible to consult the instruments. Whether the airship was rising or falling, whether she was steering north, south, east, or west, remained questions that were incapable of being solved, since the blinding flashes of lightning and the deafening peals of thunder literally deprived the occupants of the navigation room of every sense save that of touch. All they could do was to hold on tightly, clench their teeth, and wait. It required some holding on. At one moment the longitude axis of the airship was inclined at the angle of 45 degrees. Another she was heeling almost in the same angle, the while twisting and writhing like a trapped animal. Now and again she seemed to envelop the electric fluid. Dazzling flashes of blue flame played on and along the aluminum envelope. Vicious tongues of forked lightning seemed to stab the gas bags through and through, and doubtless had the ballonets contained hydrogen instead of non-inflammable barium, the Golden Hind would have crashed seaward in the trailing mass of flame. How long this inferno lasted, no one on board had the remotest idea. The flight of the time remained a matter of individual calculation. To Kenyon it seemed hours. Bransdene afterward confessed that he thought the passage through the storm lasted 30 minutes. In reality, only 6 minutes had elapsed from the time the Golden Hind was enveloped in the thunder cloud till the moment she had emerged. It was much like being in a train coming out of a long tunnel. With their eyes still dazed by the vivid flashes, the men in the navigation room became aware that the vapor was growing lighter. They could distinguish the smoke-like rolls and mist of the sunshine penetrating the upper edges of the clouds. Then, no longer beaten by the torrential downpour of hail, the Golden Hind shot into a blaze of brilliant sunshine. It seemed too good to be true. For some moment Forsyth and his companions simply stared blankly ahead until their eyes grew accustomed to the different conditions. Then Kenyon, who was still officer of the watch, glanced over the shoulder of the helmsman and noticed the compass. The lubber line was pointed west of north. The Golden Hind had been practically retracing her course, and might be anything from 50 to 100 miles farther away from her goal than she had been when the storm enveloped her. Obedient to the action of the vertical rudders, the airship swung back on her former course. The altimeter indicated a height of 12,000 feet, and the Golden Hind was still rising. 3,000 feet below was an expanse of wind-torn clouds, no longer showing dark, but a dazed whiteness. The crew of the Golden Hind were literally looking on the bright side of things. "We're well above the path of the storm," remarked Forsyth gratefully. "I've a lot to be thankful for. But the fact remains we daren't descend while that stuff's knocking about. Once in a lifetime is quite enough." Before any of his companions could offer any remark, Murgatroyd, the chief air mechanic on duty, appeared through the hatchway. "Sorry to have to report, sir," he announced, "that the two after motors are both out of action. Blade smashed on the starboard prop, sir, and the chain drive on the port prop has snapped. The chain is in your cabin, sir." "Who put it there?" asked Forsyth. "It put itself there," was the imperturbable reply. "Sort of flew out of the sprocket. The link parted and bent through the side of the fuselage, sir. I'll allow it's made a wee bit of mess inside, sir." "Take over, Bransdene, please," said Forsyth. "Directly you get a chance, obtain our position. Come on, Kenyon. Let's see the extent of the damage. The cabin doesn't matter. It isn't the first time I've slept in a punctured dog box. but the mechanical breakdown, that's the thing that counts. Following Murgatroyd, the baronet and Kenyon went aft. From number 5 motor room, they could see the motionless propeller, one of the 4 blades of which had been shattered as far as the boss, while all the other bore signs of more or less damage from the flying fragment. "Matter of 20 minutes, sir," replied Murgatroyd, in answer to his chief's inquiry as to how long the repairs would take. "We'll have to stop, and I'll bolt on a new blade. At the same time, I'll put a couple of hands onto fitting a new chain to the starboard drive. I don't fancy the A bracket strained, but I'll soon find out directly we stop." It was rough luck to have to stop all the motors and drift at the mercy of the air currents for 20 precious minutes, but the only option would be to carry on under the action of 4 propellers, only at a greatly reduced speed. "Righto, Murgatroyd," agreed the baronet. "Slap it about." "Trust me for that, sir," replied the engineer. "I've warned the breakdown gang. They'll give you an all-clear signal in 20 minutes or less, sir, or my name isn't Robert Murgatroyd." 3 minutes later, the remaining 4 motors were switched off, and the Golden Hind, rapidly losing way, fell off a broadside of the wind at the height of 12,500 feet above sea level. Instantly, the mechanics swarmed out along the slender A-frame brackets, Murgatroyd and an assistant setting to work to unbolt the damaged blades, while the other airmen passed a new chain round the sprocket wheels of the starboard motor and propeller respectively. Although there was no apparent wind and the airship was drifting at particularly the same rate as the air current, it was bitterly cold. The brackets were slippery with ice, and the difficulty of maintaining a foothold was still further increased by the erratic vertical motion of the airship. The mechanics, wearing lifelines, went about their work fearlessly. They were used to clambering about on the coastal airship, sometimes under fire, and although the present task was a simple one from a mechanical point, it was most difficult owing to the adverse atmospheric conditions. Yet, in a space of 17.5 minutes, Murgatroyd and his band of workers were back in the fuselage. Their task accomplished, in 20 minutes, the 6 motors were running once more. Murgatroyd flushed with pleasure when his chief thanked and complimented him. "Maybe, sir, you'd be liking to have your cabin repaired," he asked. "Just a sheet of metal strapped against the plate will hold till we land again. Then I'll see that it's well bolted on, sir. But I guarantee you'll not be feeling the draught tonight." Chapter 14. The Boat's Crew. The state of his cabin hardly troubled Forsyth. He never even went to investigate the extent of the damage, for the moment the airship motors were restarted, he hastened back to the navigation room. "Got a fix yet, Bransdine?" were his first words. Peter handed him a slip of paper. "We're out, of course, sir," he remarked. The position was given latitude 3 degrees 15 minutes 20 seconds south, longitude 58 degrees 20 minutes 5 seconds east. "We are," agreed Forsyth gravely. "Well, the eastward we ought to be within sight of the Seychelles. Any chance of getting petrol there, I wonder?" asked Bransdine. Judging by the name, it was a likely place to get shell brand. "Don't patter, Peter," exclaimed Kenneth facetiously. Forsyth laughed at the joke. "Rotten puns, both of them," he said. "All the same, I wish we had another 200 gallons of Pratt or Shell or any other old brand of petrol, but it's no use going on still further out of our course on the off chance of getting juice, so we'll just carry on." With the passing of the cyclone, the wind felt light. What little there was dead aft. The sea, viewed from the altitude of 3,000 feet, appeared as smooth as glass, although in reality there was a long rolling ground swell. In order to economize the petrol consumption, the speed of the Golden Hind was reduced to 90 miles an hour. Should the favoring winds hold, the airship stood a good chance of making the Australian coast. If the chances blew from the southeast, then Forsyth's chances of winning the race would be off. Just before 11 o'clock in the morning, on the day following the storm, Frampan, one of the crew on duty in the navigation room, reported a boat about 3 miles away on the port bow. By the aid of the glasses, it was seen that the boat was a ship cutter moving slowly under sail in an easterly direction. Her crew were hidden from view by a spare sail rigged as winding over the stern sheets. "Something's wrong there," remarked Brandstein. "A small boat hundreds of miles from the nearest land requires some explanation. Inform Sir Reginald Frampton. Tell him I propose coming down within hailing distance." Before Forsyth could reach the navigation room, the noise of the Golden Hind's aerial propellers had attracted the attention of the occupants of the cutter, and the 6 or 7 men whipping off the awning began waving strips of canvas and various garments. Slowing down and descending to 50 feet, the airship approached the boat. The latter had hardly seaworthy. Her topsail had been stove in on the starboard side, and had been roughly repaired by means of a piece of painted canvas. Her sails were patched in several places, while in default of a rudder, she had been steered by means of an oar. "Poor chaps, look at them," ejaculated Kenneth. "They're almost done in." The boat's crew were indeed in desperate straits. They were ragged, gaunt, and famished. Their faces and hands were burnt to a brick red color with exposure to the wind and tropical sun. 3 of them, seeing that help was at hand, had collapsed and were lying inertly on the bottom boards. Viewed from the height of 50 feet, the length of the ocean rollers became apparent. The sea was not dangerous, since there were no formidable crests to the long undulation, but there was considerable risk of the lightly built fuselage sustaining damage should the boat surge alongside. On the other hand, it was almost a matter of impossibility to get the men on board otherwise than by the airship descending and resting on the surface. Obviously, they were far too weak to attempt to climb the rope ladder, while the use of bowlines was open to great objection, both as regards the length of time and the risk of injury to the rescued men. Being an airship boat, the cutter was provided with a slinger gear. The question was whether, in her damaged state, the boat would break her back in being hoisted, but Forsyth descended to take the risk. Accordingly, wire hawsers were lowered from the 2 bow hawser pipes, and by a dint of careful maneuvering, the shackles were engaged. Then, under a lifting power of additional baridium introduced into the forward balance, the Golden Hind rose vertically until the boat was clear of the water. The motor's winches were then started, and the cutter hauled up until her gunwales were almost touching the underside of the airship's nacelle. One by one, the exhausted men were taken on board. The airship, by means of hatchway, though with cannons, had gone to the rescue of Enrico Jarvis. This was done. 2 of the Golden Hind's men dropped into the boat and passed slings around her. When these took, the weight of the cutter and the wire hawsers were unshackled, and the 2 men clambered back to the airship, which had now risen to a nearly 1,000 feet. One end of each sling was then slipped, and the boat, falling like a stone, splintered to matchwood at the struck of the surface of the sea. The 7 rescued men were given food and drink in strictly moderate quantities. Vainly they begged for more, but Forsyth knew the danger of starving men being allowed to eat and drink their fill, nor did he attempt to question them. At the juncture, beyond ascertaining that they were no more boats belonging to their ship, they were put into bunks and made to sleep. It was not until 10 o'clock on the following morning that 4 of the rescued men put in an appearance in Forsyth's cabin. The remaining 3 were too ill to leave their bunks. They were, they said, the sole survivors of the American barquette Hilda P. Muncham, 30 days out from Albany, West Australia, and had bound for Karachi, 300 miles east of the Cargos archipelago. An explosion took place, but whether external or internal, the survivors did not know. One of them thought it might have been a mine, but it was severe enough to sink Hilda P. Merchant in less than 5 minutes, and the sole survivors were first mate and 6 hands of the duty watch, who managed to scramble into the only boat that had not been shattered. Without food, and with only a small barraco of water, they set off to make their way back to Australia, knowing that with the prevailing winds they stood a much better chance of making land there than if they attempted a 300-mile beat to windward, with the risk of missing Chagos archipelago altogether. There was 8 days ago they contrived to exist upon raw fish, tallow candles which they found in a locker, and half a pint of water per man per diem. Once they sighted a vessel, but their signal for assistance was unnoticed. Then they encountered a white squall, a tail end of storm that ripped their sails before they could stow canvas and carried away the rudder. The blow was succeeded by a flat calm. For hours the cutter drifted idly, her roughly repaired sails hanging listlessly in the sultry air, almost overcome by hunger, fatigue, and tropical heat. They were on their point of despair when the timely arrival of the British airship snatched them from the lingering death. I hope we'll be able to set you ashore at Fremantle within the next 8 or 10 hours, said Forsyth. Meanwhile, we'll get in touch with the wireless station there and report your rescue. Oh yes, you may smoke in the forward compartment, but you'll find the ship is dry as the land of stars and stripes. During the rest of the day, progress was well maintained. The westerly breeze increased to half a gale, which meant an additional 30 to 40 miles an hour to the airship's speed. Barring accident, the Golden Hind would reach Fremantle with petrol still remaining in her tanks. It's not often one gets a westerly wind in the 20s, observed the baronet. Southeast trades are the usual order of things. We're lucky. Normally we should have to go as far south as 40 degrees to rely on a westerly wind. It will help us from Fremantle to New Zealand, said Peter. I remember reading in the paper not so many months ago about the skipper of sailing a vessel who tried for days to beat up from Melbourne to Fremantle. Finally, he gave up beating the windward as hopeless job. So he turned and ran before the westerly breeze sailed around the Horn and the Cape of Good Hope, and actually arrived at Fremantle 7 days before another vessel that had left Melbourne at the same time as he did. Let's hope we find an equally favoring wind to help us across the Pacific, remarked Forsyth. We'll want it. I want to thank everyone for coming out. This was Live to Tapes ASMR in partnership with Project Aerospace. I hope to see everyone tonight. We are continuing our Half-Life 2 live stream that will start sometime between 9 and 11 p.m. Eastern Time. Once again, I want to thank everyone for coming, and I'll see everyone tonight. Bye-bye.